Welcome back to the live stream. This week we've got Blair Fix. Blair is considered a heretic in economics. That's why we like him. Be kind, stay safe, and enjoy the show. Welcome back to the show. It's July 15th, 2023. We've had the 11 hottest days on this planet in 100,000 years, but we're still trucking away. Welcome back. We've got Blair Fix. He'll be on the show. We've got Steve Keen. He's somewhere in an airport, so we'll see how that internet connection works out. And we've got Mike as well, as always. I'm going to do the list this week because I've made it so much longer that I'm starting to feel bad about other people having to do it. So I'll kick it off the first time, and then I'll make somebody else do it later. So I'll bring up the list for you guys. Let's see it. Here it is, and I'll have to read the name. So we got Bass B. Bass B, thanks for being with us over the last few weeks. WWE fan 0104, thank you. Josh, he's from Canada. We've got TR. TR's always around. Tom Roberts, he's a newer character. I'm glad you're here, Tom. Bob Leor, or Lore. I'm going to go with Leor. He's been around for a few months. Owen Wall, he's fairly new. Thanks, Owen, for being here. Botch Mandela, regular. Circular economics. Let's call that circular economics. Yeah, I like that. He's been around for a while. Dre Guy, I think. Thanks. He's been here for a few months. We've got Flaming Leg. Flaming Leg's pretty new. I like these names. Joe Polito. Joe Polito is a wealth of information. I see him all over social media. Joe, thank you for always being with us. The Hasty Ant. Again, regular. Glad you're here. Appreciate you a lot. CF, I think, is copying TR. I'd sure like to know what these letters stand for. Ghost on the half shell. He has the record for being here the most consecutive weeks in a row. We have Lost Adult. Seen him around since the beginning, so I'm glad he was here last week, he or she. Commie John. Well, Commie John's here off and on. Thanks for being here last week, Commie. We've got Murphy. Murphy's my biggest ally out there on social media. Same with Phil Waller, another big ally of mine when I get myself into trouble on social media, especially Twitter, and I do that a lot. We've got the Deep Sea No Man, new character. I like it. And then those other guys that might have a horse stuck in the yard somewhere. And we'll bring that down. We'll bring on Professor Steve Keen. Steve.
Hi all. I'm actually calling you from Newark Airport, and the double complication for me here is that I'm flying out of British Airways from Newark back to London, and their lounge is not open yet, so I'm stuck in the effing open. And fortunately, not particularly right now, but I would expect gate announcements to start at any moment. And make sure you take account of all the warnings to make sure you keep your personal belongings with you.
Oh, okay. How's the sound now? Do you have better sound from me?
It sounds a bit better. I couldn't change over to the commercial one, but it seems reasonable. So we'll see how we go.
All right, perfect. Let's bring on Mike Radzicki, Professor Rads. Mike, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, yeah. Hi, Steve. Hi, how's everybody doing?
Matt.
Yeah. Good to see everybody.
I don't seem to have my soundboard working, so I can't give any applause and claps or anything.
Mind the gap, yeah. Thanks, Lana.
Yeah.
Well, we've been having sheet rain torrential downpours for the last week here in Massachusetts. And the good news is, in between all the sheet rain, we've made good progress on my new wood shop. So we got the excavator in here and dug the foundation and put in the foundation wall. So they were able to pour some concrete in between the rain showers, and otherwise situation normal.
Perfect. I'm trying to actually bring up my little because I gotta do this for Blair. My little soundboard. Macro buttons. Let's see if this works. This is great doing this live. Here it is. Oh, perfect. What do we have here? Beautiful. Beautiful. And for the guy of the potentially 2 hours, Blair Fix.
Great to be here.
Blair, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm as good as I can be. I just moved across the country from Toronto to Edmonton, Alberta. So it's been a disorienting 2 weeks, but life is getting back to normal.
So you're back in Alberta now?
I'm in Alberta now, but today I'm not in Edmonton. I'm in Calgary, visiting some family. But I'm getting used to the new normal, which seems to be the wildfire season in Canada, with smoke and haze everywhere. So escaped. It was really bad in Toronto 2 weeks ago from fires in Quebec, and okay driving across the country. And then the last 5 days have been hazy, so it's seems to be the new reality.
You know what's quite it's good for me is here in Vancouver. We've had no smoke, so we have been so lucky over the last 2 months that all the wind has been blowing east the whole time. Usually, at least in the last 5 or 6 years, we've had smoke here in the lower mainland in BC and Vancouver every year. And some years your eyes are red. So we've been very lucky, but we had quite a few lightning strikes. I think 300 fires started last weekend here in BC. So, I think that lucky streak I've had here down in Vancouver might be coming to an end. So but that's what happens when you're at 400. What is it? What are we at parts per million, Steve, in the atmosphere right now?
About 422 right now. I think 422, 423, getting up in those levels. And like the thing which I'm finding from following the science literature on this, on Twitter, who are scientists tweeting about it, it is just ludicrous how many major indicators are all screaming off at the one time. If the Earth was a patient, they'd not be in intensive care to be in the operating theatre right now, given the messages that are coming out. Of course, we all think it's all going to be a hunky-dory and nothing to worry about. But it is quite possible. I mean, one of the many tipping points we have is the boreal forests, and of course, Canada and has got one of the major stands of boreal forests, and it seems literally to be going up in smoke, and that if these fires continue, they're just at a hooker lounge. Well, actually, that would be a nice little. This is actually not a hooker, okay? I have been known, right? But this is a COVID filter. Listen, people ask me when I'm wearing. I put the whole regalia on, okay? You've asked for it, so here it comes. Whole regalia. Here we go. Now imagine this sort of hooker lounge, and when I wear it, it's a real. Every time I go to a new airport security, they've never seen anything like this before. They want to rip it off my face and put it through the scanner for checking, and I refuse. So they've got to then go and scan me afterwards. And when people see me, their first response is, "Oh, do you have breathing difficulties?" And I say, "No, I'm trying to avoid them." Anyway, that's my little device story here. But if I was in Canada right now, I would definitely be wearing those. Just look at the, you know, the airnow.gov site the Americans maintain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
No.
take a look at it. I know you can't scan my screen from where I am, but there's a band of red and some black just slashing its way from just north of Vancouver all the way down towards Chicago. And it's just an enormous area of land that's on fire right now. So I think your days of being smoke-free, Ty and Dan, are about to come to an end.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I was just thinking about that the boreal forest, I suspect, is heading north. Right now it comes down quite far south in Canada, but I don't think that will last. That land will change into, I don't know what it'll change in.
Yeah,
I might,
but not forest.
well,
I might add as a woodworker, this has implications for lumber prices.
Well, charcoal's going to be dirt cheap. You got that?
Yeah, right.
There's a positive feedback for you.
I got to pivot to
charcoal.
charcoal.
Charcoal is cheap as chips. Just move to Canada and vacuum up them. Take milk, please. Take this latest export of maple flavored charcoal. That's what you're going to be exporting
Right.
now. Pardon me being facetious here.
Blair, I want to go into the meat of the things to be entertaining. Tell me about those infamous tweets a few months ago. Tell us about that correlation that you were describing. I know one side of the aisle there was very critical of it, but I want you to just articulate it with your words, what you were trying to describe, why some
Sure.
people were upset about it.
Well, let's background, which is that it wasn't really a deep dive or anything. I was writing a book review of Red Team Blues, it's a science fiction book by Cory Doctorow, and I wrote a review, and then I kind of was talking about this relation between violence, murder rates, and dystopia and income inequality. So it's a pretty well-known correlation dating back to the book, The Spirit Level, that there's a correlation between income inequality and murder rates, among other various social bads. So I made a chart, as I often do, and I tweeted it. And of course, the correlation is not super tight across countries. R squared statistics, it's about 0.2. But, you know, it's there, and it's kind of among the social scientists, it's not controversial. But I posted it, and for whatever reason, this tweet went out viral on Twitter. And viral mostly because there was a pile-on of ridicule saying, oh, this is a bullshit chart, like the terrible correlation, this guy uses log scales, the data is crap, and then just a whole bunch of actually racist stuff too. People saying, yeah, this is, you know, why murder rates are high in parts of Africa, ... or sometimes not ... just explicitly racist. So I was personally, this thing went viral and got like a couple million impressions, and for me, I got exposed to this whole belly of right-wing Twitter that I don't see because I don't follow anything from it. So it was eye-opening.
Nice. I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna tell everybody I love watching that stuff because I wasn't involved in it. So it was entertaining. I'm glad you made it through it. We did an episode. I'll bring myself up here on the big screen. Yeah, I can see Blair's centered himself on the camera. We did an episode, our second episode, back in November, and we had our first guest. It happened to be Blair and his friend, Reagan Boychuk, who we had last month on the show, or 2 months ago on the show for his election push. I never managed to stream it to the Steve Keen channel. So actually, I'm thinking when our next week that we take off, I'm going to put it up for people to watch in its entirety. That aside, I think because it wasn't seen by really too many people, Blair, tell me your connection with Steve Keen.
Sure. Well, Steve was journal examiner for my PhD thesis, which was kind of a interdisciplinary look at economics through the lens of so I was looking at how hierarchy connects to all these different aspects of economics, from like economic growth to income. Steve flew in to Toronto for my defense, and I was pretty nervous because I had no idea what was going to happen. We ended up having a great time. It was a lot of fun. And so that's when I met Steve, and we've kind of been connected over that was in 2018. We've been connected over the last 5 years. And of course, I really like what Steve's doing. There's not a lot of people who are very visible doing heterodox economics and trying to communicate it to a public audience. And that's kind of what I try to do on my blog right now.
Steve, tell me about Blair.
Yeah, for my point, like Blair hasn't mentioned that when a PhD student can actually nominate it like their external examiner to be. So Blair actually nominated me, as I found out when we got together in Toronto. And then when I was, so I basically agreed, it's a bit like you, Ty, you sort of say, yeah, okay, why not? And then you read it. And I must say that in terms of like, everybody knows that when I first saw Ty's model, it was through him coming on a discussion group like this, saying, I've made a model of the pandemic in Minsk. You'd like to take a look at? And I went, yeah, sure, okay. And then I opened the thing up and went, holy fuck, this is incredible. Really, truly incredible model. Similar thing with Blair. I didn't know him from Adam, of course, when he first, I got written to by, how do you pronounce their names? Bircher and Nitzen? I never got it right.
Yeah, Bichler and Nitzen.
Yeah. So they were the two that I knew, and I thought Blair was a student of theirs. And what I was expecting in the thesis was an application of their capital as power analysis. And I opened it up, and I'd gone for a trip to Ecuador. I was giving a set of talks in Ecuador. The kids in Ecuador overloaded me to buggery with far too many bloody talks, and I was completely exhausted in a foul mood, I've got to say. And then I hop on the plane. I thought, okay, I'm going to read this between Quito, capital of Ecuador, and flying to Toronto, which I did in a direct flight. And I was just looking, holy shit, this is incredible. And it wasn't the capitalist power. It was basically focusing, as Blair himself said a moment ago, on the role of hierarchy and income distribution and power throughout capitalism, and not just capitalism, going right back to Egyptian times. And I was simply stunned. Very, very high quality work, very original thought. And the only question as an examiner supposed to ask questions of the student. The only thing was, how did you come up with the idea of hierarchy? And of course, Blair answered that for us in his actual presentation. Then we got to know each other better after that. So Blair, do you want to explain where the idea of hierarchy came from and how you use it?
Yeah. Well, I think I actually got the idea of Peter Turchin, who's a social scientist, biologist turned social scientist, very does what he calls cliodynamic history. But one of the papers that he looked at was kind of the rise in fires and how the number of as empires get larger, like population wise, they scale administrative hierarchy. He had data that was great, count the number of administrative layers in government and correlate it with the population of the empire, and it's pretty tight correlation. And he said, well, why? The question is why? And his response was number. We have hierarchies because it's a very efficient way to scale up organization. Dunbar's number is this, comes from studying primates, and there's a correlation between brain size and group size. And Dunbar was an anthropologist. Maybe this is predictive of how humans can organize. You need brain capacity. It's called I think the social theory of intelligence. It's controversial, but the correlation is there in the data, and Dunbar predicts what size, and it's going to be about 150 people, which is kind of roughly what simple societies organize at that scale. But clearly humans now vastly surpass that, and Turchin's what hierarchy does. In a hierarchy, you interact with your superior, and then if you're higher up in the chain of command, then you have subordinates, and that doesn't scale really. You're where you are. Say if you have 10 subordinates and one superior, that is the size of the hierarchy doesn't affect that relation. So it basically removes this constraint of having to interact with a lot of different people in a kind of a flat group. And so I read that, and I started thinking about how important hierarchy was. And then I was just playing around with different models, and I thought immediately this has got to be important for income inequality, because look at CEO pay. Pretty at the top of the hierarchy, you earn more. Bottom, and then I started building models, and I discovered really nobody was doing this type of work. There was Herbert Simon, who's a famous economist, the Nobel Prize, or the quote unquote Nobel Prize in economics. He wrote a paper briefly about equal pay using a model of hierarchy, and it was great for a simple model, but nobody really. So what I did in my PhD was take this model and more realistic, and then try to explain an distribution of income in the US. And then one of the did kind of as an experiment was run the model backwards, and it comes to income inequality if you take current levels of and then just reduce them and go back in time, and is that if you get rid of hierarchy, then inequality basically goes away. So this was a thought experiment at the time.
Yeah, and a very fruitful one.
Yeah,
Blair,
and one of the things that during my dissertation is this is great, but where are you going to publish it? And that was the challenge. That was certainly not in economics journals.
Yeah.
Blair, I want to know what I kind of know myself, but what drives an individual to become so passionate about studying statistics, studying complex systems? What makes a person tick in that certain way for you specifically? And then I'll throw the question to Mike, because I'll ask him the same question. What drives you to this passion? Because I've seen your blogs. Everybody check out Blair's website. I'll put up the link in a second. What drives you doing this sort of stuff? Where does the passion come from?
Me, it's very simple. It's almost childlike that I have questions that I want answered. And early on, when I kind of started doing economics, I would look to literature to answer those questions, and I learned a lot. But eventually, I started asking questions that nobody had answered yet, or at least it was not easy to find answers. And once I started basically diving into empirical work, I just got infatuated with the fact that, like, with the internet and public data sets, I have a question, I can write some code in a couple hours or even less sometimes, and do the question right away. Maybe not definitively, but I at least get a sense for what's going on. So I am totally infatuated by analyzing data to questions, and that's what drives me. Really, is not what the new questions that I don't know the answer to. I don't know where they come from in my head, and then I try to, and sometimes, the annoying part is sometimes I can't answer them because there's no data. And that with hierarchy, I often run into a dead end because, for instance, you want to know the pay structure within corporations, and of course they don't want you to know that very data. So that's a dead end. But the internet is just full of data. So that's how I come at it.
Nice. I can relate to that. I'll ask Mike the same question because it's such a niche thing. If you think about it, any researcher on this planet is in a very small minority. That way we think when we see a system or a complex problem or a data set, we see it, I think, in a different way, and it's fascinating to me. For me, I articulate it as it's like me and my model train. So for me, modeling system dynamics, it is childlike, like Blair said. And when I'm building a model, it's me building that model train set. There's that childlike inquisitiveness, if you could say. Mike, I'll ask you that question. What is your driver and passion for this sort of stuff?
Well, it all started for me when I was in high school. My father would read the Wall Street Journal every day. And one day he slapped it in front of me and he said, read the front page, read the editorial page, tell me one thing. And at first I was like, what? I don't want to do that, but I did it. And then he did it the next day. And pretty soon he didn't have to tell me to do it. I found it very interesting. This is in the late 1970s. So Vietnam War in the United States was over. So the big thing was the OPEC oil embargo, stagflation, whip inflation now. And I became curious as to, well, why is this stuff happening? So I decided to study economics. I became quite dissatisfied with the economics profession, even though I was going into it, because there was economic theory, which seemed to me like you got to memorize all this math. And it wasn't very insightful, but sort of like it was boot camp. But then there was the real world. But that was just, in that era, you would get a giant reel-to-reel tape, run it on a mainframe, and numbers would come down, and you'd torture the numbers with econometrics. And it seemed to me to be not very insightful. And I guess the best way to put it was disappointing. And then by chance, I discovered system dynamics. And I had this like here we can lay out and model a complex dynamic system like an economic system, for example, and get to causality. Why is something happening? And we're not just looking for statistical correlations, but we're looking for the underlying why. Certainly back to the original comments about income inequality and the murder rate and a correlation, right? We know that, correlation does not mean causation. If there's causality, there's correlation, but correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. And in fact, I can put in the chat if you want. I think I put this up on my Twitter feed. There's some dude with a lot of time on his hands who has a book and a website on spurious correlations. And you see all these really tight fits for bizarre things that have nothing to do with one another. So that cries out for modeling, like with Minsky or with Stella, right? Where we want to get it to at the why it's happening. So the sort of correlation that you found with, well, others have found it, I guess, too, but with the murder rate and income inequality should be a trigger, a thought provoker. Okay, that's interesting. Is it spurious or is there something going on? And if there's something going on, why is it going on? What is the driving force or the 17 things that are intertwined causing this? Hierarchy is probably involved, absolutely. Possibly other things, but this is where people like us who do this sort of work need to dive in and lay this stuff out concretely. My opinion is, sorry, I don't want to be long-winded here, but a real quick story. I was asked one time to give a talk at the White House because Al Gore loves system dynamics. He was VP at the time. So I addressed actually his staff. And I was given an hour. I had 45 minutes to present my work, 15 minutes for Q&A. I pulled out my best stuff. And after 45 minutes, the first question from the head guy was, oh, this is all very interesting, Professor, but great, you got this modeling tool. He said, we could get 1,000 professors in here or consultants. They all have their modeling tool. Big deal. Felt very bad at this point. But then he said one thing that was very important. I mentioned that we can use this sort of modeling, Minsky system dynamics, to help experts and stakeholders reach a consensus. And he said, if you can do that, that is huge, because that's what we need in government. So in terms of convincing people, right, you have an interesting correlation that stimulates controversy, Twitter wars, whatever. Now you build a model and you put it out there and you say, I got equations here, cause and effect. Where have I got it wrong? Most of the people agree with most of the stuff. The widget goes here, then it goes here, then it goes to the customer. The dollar comes here, then it goes here, then it's spent. Who disagrees? You find out that 85% of your model, nobody disputes. So, okay, now we can focus on the 15% of the where there's controversy, and you either resolve it, somebody's incorrect, or you run the model two ways, this guy's way and that guy's way. A lot of times it doesn't matter because it's not a leverage point. But you can start to build consensus and understanding for the great problems of today. But I think it involves the sort of tools that
I'm going to ask Steve the same question. Now, Steve, I'll unmute you in a second. I'm trying to keep the airport announcer out of the show. I'll ask you the same question, but only relative to modeling with. So when you built your I believe it was for your PhD thesis, the Minsky. I'll keep it restricted to that because I already know you have a passion to hate fucking neoclassical economics. But that kind of gets outside of the model train set stuff. Tell me what your interest is, that passion, that childlike passion that you have. Explain it.
I'm going to be doubly childlike and start first of all with airport announcers. It just reminded me. I'm stuck in an airport here, and I just recently rewatched the old Flying High movie. You know the one? Okay. And there's a scene where people are coming up to park their cars at the airport, and a male voice says, "Parking is in the red zone. Please do not park in the white zone." And a female says, "The white zone is for parking. Please do not park in the red zone." And on they go. And finally say, we all know this is about you want me to have an abortion. But it turns out the two people who were doing that skit were actually the announcers at San Francisco Airport. And they were married to each other. So, little joke there. Anyway, back to me being childish and all that jazz. The thing that fascinates us in general is to wish to understand how the world works. And what makes all the people in this conversation very different to the mainstream is we haven't fallen for the conventional wisdom, in the sense that Galbraith meant it a thing which is widely shared, widely agreed to, and fundamentally wrong. So in that case, we then have to find some other way to understand things. In my case, it began from differential equations. I got a real high, I have to say, out of a year 11, like at high school, second last year of high school, economics teacher whose name was Tim Keating, no relation to Paul Keating, became Australia's Prime Minister at a later stage. But he explained Rostow's theory of economic growth to us. It was a causal cycle. Okay? The whole thing was laid out as this causes that, feeds back on itself. And I thought it was fantastic. So I got to university expecting to find that sort of mathematics and that sort of logic in my economics degree, and it was bloody disappointing. In fact, in some ways, what I got from the lecturers at the university was lower grade than I got from that year 11 teacher. So that made me initially skeptical. Then it's a tube, Ghost. Okay, not a mic, it's a tube. Here we go. Watch back earlier in the show. So I was doing mathematics at the same time because I love mathematics. And I was very lucky to get a top class, really unusual high school teacher type lecturer in mathematics who would intimidate the students into silence, but then write the most dramatic, just brilliant of how to do mathematical modeling. And I was back in economics, there was shitty stuff was being done and they were jumping over steps and thinking, this is just terrible. So all that stuff made me biased towards differential equations and looking for dynamic factors, and then reading all the various non-orthodox economic theories, including Marx cover to cover. I mean, from 1844 to 1894, everything he ever wrote on economics, and not liking Marxian analysis, but finding an alternative way of doing it. So in the middle of all that, I read all the various, critiques of capitalism, things like Baran and Sweezy, monopoly capital, and so on. And they all talk about capitalism having a tendency towards depression. That didn't make any sense to me at all. What I saw was the tendency towards a boom. Then I read Minsky, and reading Minsky, that's an explanation saying boom and bust is what happens in capitalism. The finance sector derives it. So I knew the tools I'd need to use, which are the differential equations, and that's where I came through. And I wouldn't be doing how Steve read Marx, coffee IV drip. Better explain that one shortly, guys. But anyway, yeah, I just read. I just realized that Minsky used the wrong framework himself for mathematical modeling, and I built the alternative first of all in differential equations. Then I discovered system dynamics technology. So I bought a copy for $3,500, I might add, of a program called VisSim, and that was just brilliant as a way of laying out a causal model, better than Simulink, but it disappeared commercially. So that's the long background. But the initial thing about differential equations are necessary to model a dynamic system. Economists, if don't use them, if a handful of economists do know how to use them, they use them badly. They don't know about equilibrium analysis, stability analysis, Lyapunov exponents, etc., etc. So there's a whole world of complex systems that I found I could bring to economics, and that's what I've been trying to do ever since.
Very nice. Everybody, that was good, Steve. I'm glad you gave that input. I was thinking as you guys were talking, it was if Jay Forrester was still alive, it was his birthday yesterday. And we're kind of, at least, even Blair to some degree works with complex systems. Jay Forrester is the father of system dynamics. He has passed, but it was his birthday yesterday. Just some useless information I'm giving as a host of the show. Everybody who's watching, make sure you hit that like button. If you're new here, subscribe to the Prof. Steve Keen channel. If you're on Twitter, make sure you hit the like button there and retweet. Then come over here, join the chat. I've been screwing up the chat. We have a new interface here. I'm looking at my big screen, and it doesn't seem like the actual feed, the chat's showing up, but here on my interface, the chat's disappeared. So if there are some issues, it's entirely because of me. I'm a bad operator. Blair, I want to ask you the question. What is your most favorite project you've worked on in your research career? What was the name of it? Why did it interest you? And where did it take you?
Well, that's a hard question. Well, from a practical standpoint, my favorite thing is always my current project. I don't look back a lot. So, point of view, the most recent piece of analysis that I did was with a friend of mine, D.T. Cochran. We mapped out the ownership structure of 10 billionaire families in Canada. It turns out that the government of Canada has an intercorporate ownership database that they publish regularly, but nobody knows about it or uses it. And so my friend D.T. Cochran pointed this out to me, and so we went to town and was with it. So we mapped out. It was very, very interesting for me that this ownership network of these billionaires, because you kind of know their names or some of them. It's the Thompson family. They own Reuters, and the West owns a bunch of supermarkets. But many Canadian billionaires keep a low profile. They're not trying to be like Donald Trump and hog the media. They would rather be completely out of the public eye. So just map things was really fascinating. It was a nice application of my interest in hierarchy. But if I had to pick one kind of project that was most my favorite, is I think it to really my first big discovery, which is that I was looking at energy consumption data with data on firm size, government size, institute in general. And I found this really tight correlation that as countries consume more energy, institutions tend to get larger. And this in many different scales. You can See it over time, the last century of U.S. data. Fewer people are self-employed. Consumption increases. Big corporation, then average firm size gets bigger. And you could across countries, and then you can just look at the whole size distribution of firm. For the math, people who like it, follows a power law distribution, and it just, the whole distribution shifts. The tail gets fatter. So big firms get bigger, and there are fewer small firms as countries industrialize and consume more energy. So that was a discovery that I made, I don't know, 10 years now, I guess. And that kind of was one of the key things that took me down the road to studying hierarchy, because I think that's fundamentally about hierarchy. I think that humans use hierarchy to consume more energy. And it's almost, for me, not even limited to humans. If you kind of look at all of biology, from the simplest animals to the biggest animals, what are they doing? Like, what makes an elephant different than a bacteria? And it's these nested systems. It's a hierarchy, different from a human hierarchy, obviously, but it's nested systems, growing complexity to kind of consume energy. I mean, that's all life does, really, is consume energy. But then these kind of miraculous structures come from it. So that's probably my favorite thing so far.
Actually,
also,
Blair, would you? I'm sorry. Yeah, I'd like you to have a play with our Minsky software, or rather Ravel software, and see how well that handles your data. By the way, you've got some fabulous data sets there, and you probably know I'm working on a data tool called Ravel. So I'd like you to have a bit of a play and see if you can pull the stuff in.
I am definitely interested in it. I have never built any serious systems models. The last systems modeling I did, which I think we talked about briefly the last time I was on, was modeling Hubbard curves. So like peak oil, you can do that with a very simple, which is a variation of a predator-prey model, where you just make the prey becomes the oil, and the predators are the oil rigs, and you just make the prey non-renewable, and then you out of that you get a Hubbard curve and a delay between the peak of oil rigs in production. And so I was doing that actually for Alberta oil, conventional oil production with Reagan Boychuk, which is Alberta's conventional oil patch is now well past its peak, although the tar sands are still ramping up. So,
so if I can leap in here on that topic. So there was some work done by some friends of mine in system dynamics on kind of peak oil and the Hubbard method of predicting oil reserves versus the U.S. Geologic Survey method. Which one was better? And again, this takes us into the realm of simulation, because one of the beautiful things you can do with simulation modeling is what we call synthetic data experiments. So what my friends did was to say, all right, let's build a model of oil reserves, discovered oil reserves, the use of the oil reserves, blah, 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 all that stuff, and laid that out. And they said, let's pretend that's the real world. It's not, it's a model, but let's pretend it's the real world. Now, separately, let's model Hubbard's method and the U.S. Geological Survey method accurately. What do they look at? And then let's let the two methods predict the peak oil and the remaining reserves and whatever. And overwhelmingly, Hubbard's method was way more accurate, because even though it wasn't doing it for real data, it was synthetic data. You know the answer, because you know the model is the real world. Overwhelmingly, Hubbard's method was the most accurate. So so there's some literature on that that's quite interesting. And the synthetic data experiment thing, I think, is a valuable tool in the simulation world.
Oh, that's interesting.
What do you guys think? Has shale oil just kind of kicked the can down? I know we're talking about Hubbard's curve right now. Did shale oil kind of kick the can down for the road a bit for the consumption of oil? Are we at the top of that curve, or do you think there's reasonable expectations that we're going to find more deposits to continue that curve in an upward trend? Anybody have thoughts?
I can add one, actually, which just came out of the seminar I've been talking to gifted high school students between going into their final year of high school. So students that are likely to go to university and to be, a very intelligent lot, quite an enjoyable experience. But one of the other lecturers there comes from the corporate world to some extent, corporate and philosophy combined. And he's, I wouldn't call him a denialist, but he's sort of just, it doesn't really matter, we'll find some other solution. He's much better than that, but he hasn't really thought deeply about the overall issues yet. But he mentioned a thing I'd never heard of before called the Green River Formation. And apparently that contains more oil in its deposit than all the other oil deposits on the planet combined. So it wouldn't be a problem if there wasn't a problem from burning it and refining it. But of course, there's a huge problem because the oil is, and I'm going with CF here, it's going to destroy us. The availability of energy is one of the elements that can destroy the system. And that's what limits to growth. We go back to the 72 study. One of their alternative options was the double the resource availability. So just in the last matter of, I don't know how long the Green River has been discovered, but Green River gives us a potential way to boost the oil levels, which will then boost pollution at a later stage, if we ever use it. And also phosphorus, we're talking about phosphorus and that Norwegian discovery. So two very recent discoveries mean maybe we've got twice as many resources as we thought we have. So our crisis is going to be different. We're still going to have a crisis.
I didn't know about that.
Mike, what?
Reserve. But as far as the U.S. shale oil, my thing was that even knew about it when he did his modeling in the 50s to predict U.S. peak oil. He just discounted it as too low quality, and that's really the question. Never mind climate change. I mean, we know it'd be a disaster if we burned everything we had, but the big question is, and what could possibly be extracted at a profit, and that's, in my mind, nobody knows. Nobody there, people are really interested. I got really interested for a while in energy return on investment and that kind of idea. And there's a clear point where it's if there more energy is spent extracting oil, for instance, than you get out of it, then it's not a net energy source. But we're not there. We're nowhere near that yet. So I thought the answer was very clear. Probably 15 years ago, I thought most of these reserves would not be used. They were just too low quality. But now, I don't know. I claim ignorance. I have really no idea where we're headed.
Yeah, and it's certainly that they've put. Yes, Mark, you go ahead, Mike. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, as technology advances and you invent things like fracking or whatever, and resources that were previously not high enough quality, or you can't get to them or wherever, now you can, that makes the supply of fossil fuels available grow, and that forces the price down. You're going to see people saying, screw an electric vehicle, I'm buying a Humvee or a 3/4 ton truck that burns gas because it's cheap. If it's a pain to do that because it's so expensive, no way. I'll go, I'll ride my bike to work or take a motorcycle or a scooter or something. But you could see that on the roads, right? When gas prices were high, everybody was buying small vehicles and whatever. And when gas prices went down, everybody's like, I want a truck, man. So as technology progresses, and technology is hard to predict. It's like, who knows what the next greatest discovery is going to be, right? But as the availability of these fuels is made bigger, price is going to be driven down, and more people are going to use them. So you either need government regulation or you need other technologies that deal with the with the emissions, carbon sequestration techniques and this sort of thing. And what, but I'm like with Blair, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it's very hard to predict.
I think you can rule out successful carbon sequestration with current technology and the energy cost of getting carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. This is where
currently, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's why one of the deniers cases comes back to bite you, and they say it's only a tiny amount in the atmosphere. That's true, and incredibly effective at obtaining heat. But to take that tiny amount out, because it is tiny, involves a huge amount of filtration, and thus far the energy cost of the filtration probably meant if you're not doing something else to generate the energy, then you're actually putting more carbon dioxide in. If you're using fossil fuel driven stuff to get out of the air, you'd actually make the situation worse. So we have a real dilemma there.
Actually, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, just got a weird sound. I better let you take over. I've got a lot of talk in the background here at the moment.
Yeah. I forgot what I was gonna say. I was gonna say something really relevant. Oh yeah. So just to even add on to what Steve was saying, even if we could develop the energy sources to power the sequestering technology, extracting all the raw minerals to actually bring on a green energy would be the same thing as just running fossil fuel to run these carbon suits. What I'm trying to say is we've kind of put ourselves in a bind at this point for carbon sequester technology. We're kind of overshot too far for that to be the only option to move forward. We actually need to reduce our carbon output altogether, and then combine that with some sort of sequestering technology. Does anybody here watch Nate Hagens? I think his last name's Hagens. I know Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll turn Steve back on. He was actually doing something interesting the other day, or in not his podcast, but like a short clip. And he was mentioning that there is a big fallacy with electric vehicles reducing oil consumption altogether. And it came down to the fact that the way we refine oil is we simply reduce. So we get our butane and propane first, and then for the 40% of that barrel of oil, which is gasoline, that's next. And I got to turn Steve off. That is so distracting. It was something amazing. I suggest you guys check it out. It's like a 20-minute video, but really our even moving, with electric vehicles, our entire refining system is geared to siphon off the gasoline first. So it has to be refined out of so we still use that full barrel of oil. If we turn off gas tomorrow, we're still refining it out because our refineries are set to distill that out first. That was just something, a little, again, useless information from Ty Keenes, brought to you by Ty Keenes Mind. I'll turn you back on, Steve. Hold on.
Okay.
Go.
I want some useful information, which is, Blair, your approach and the technology you use to do your work. So take us through R and all your mathematical routines and the approach you take to analyzing data.
Yeah, sure. Well, I do use R, which I should probably what that is. I mean, the go-to that most people in the corporate world use to crunch data is just Excel, right? Spreadsheets. And I started out using that, but it very quickly blew up on me. If you load a file with 10 million lines in it into Excel, it just blows up. So I started looking at alternatively two that are open source. There's R and there's Python now. People use Python for everything. It's a general purpose language, but it's libraries for statistics. But I choose to use R, which is like any tool. It's the most important aspect of it is the community, and that's why I use it, because number one, if I don't know how to do something, it happens a lot. Even now, I've been using it for 10 plus years. You just go on Stack Exchange and somebody gives you the answer like right away. I never read a manual or anything. So the help, that's really important. And number two, R has packages for almost anything you want to do. So rather than write a bunch of code for some custom calculation, say for instance, these charts mapping billionaire networks. I had no idea how to make network graphs, but there was an R package, and I literally just used the package, figured out how to do it, and plugged in the data, and it dumped out this code. So I love it.
Mike?
Yeah, so Blair, along these lines, your work on hierarchies and mapping out the billionaire interactions and what have you, I'm wondering if you've ever thought about interlocking directorates, corporate directorates, because that's a big area of institutional economics. And some institutionalists have been working on that back in the day. The software was more primitive, but trying to see it, the folks that sit on this board also sit on this board and also sit on this board, and and whatever. And does that relate to your hierarchy stuff? Your
Yeah, I mean,
stuff?
it fundamentally does. I haven't personally done board membership. I'm interested in all aspects of hierarchy, starting from kind of the primary one, which is really just the employment, the chain of command within firms. And that's, I think, the one that dominates most people's work. But unfortunately, it's the one where the data is the most difficult to get. But then you move up a level, and then you have companies owning other companies, interlocking board of directors. So there's many layers of hierarchy. I'm interested in all of them. The limit is always what kind of data can I find. And so in Canada, I just became aware of this data, this database that the government is creating on interlocking ownership between corporations. And so that usually everything I do is data driven. I discover that this data exists, and I go and see where I can take it. And R is the tool for that. And it's a program. To get back to the tool itself, it's a programming language. So you're not pointing and clicking. Everything is done in code. And the advantage of doing that, once you understand what you're doing, is that it's reproducible. Like the script tells me exactly what I've done. And you comment, and as long as you comment it and remember what your code means. But that's kind of a best practice with any kind of coding. So it took me a while to learn, but now I love it.
Blair, can you plug your website and all your work? Give out the links. We're at the end of the first hour. I'll get you to stay into the second hour, and we can keep talking about R and stuff. But let's plug your stuff first.
So my blog is called Economics from the Top Down, and that's really where I publish everything. I still write academic articles, but my go-to is to put everything I write on the blog first. So I try to write it in a way that's like everything is very rigorous. The analysis is rigorous, but I try to write it in a way that is not typical academic writing. And I'm also following a model of crowdfunding my work. So there are links on my site. If you like what I'm doing, you can support me, because like many heterodox economists, I have no permanent academic position right now.
Very nice. We're going to go into the second half of the show. So everybody stay tuned. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. Not only will you get notifications for this show, but Steve puts out a lot of great work on, mathematical modeling with Minsky, and sometimes he'll put some of his presentations up. So it's good to have your notifications on for him. If you're over on Twitter, make sure you hit that like button, retweet it. Let's get this show out there so as many people can see it as possible. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We did it again. Now, as I said, our last show was canceled after you appeared on it. So fingers crossed the executives don't do that again.
The more I read in the neoclassical thing, the more I just, I'm scratching my eyeballs out all the time.
I'm the voice of God in the background.
Oh, geez.
If I can take it.
Once the coins get warm enough because of your body temperature in the winter, it actually keeps you moderate beer drinking in the evenings. Well, that's inspiring for a Saturday morning. Still friends after the show. If you got any questions for Blair, make sure you ask them in the chat. I tried to do a few of them there last week. I think it was pretty fruitful. I forget. It's really hard without Dan. Dan's away in Alberta, so that's why he's not here this week. So it's harder for me to catch the questions. But if you do have some for Blair, please ask him. I'll post him and we'll get him answered. I'll bring on Blair first because I'm going to put him on the spot. Blair, are your reading skills good?
They're competent.
So a lot of things have changed on this show since you were the first guest back in episode 2. We do a top chatter list, giving recognition to all our viewers.
Sure.
I read it first. I'm going to get you to read it second. I have a bunch of sound effects on my soundboard, so you will get one of those sound effects depending on your competence in reading them. So I will put them up here now, Blair. Pressure's on. Go ahead.
All right. We've got Bass B, We Fan 0104, TR, Tom Roberts, Bob Lior, Owen Wall, Botched Man, Ciclery Economist, Dregai, Fleming Leg, Joe Polito, The Hasty Ant, CF, Ghost on the Half Shell, Lost Adult, Commie John Murphy, Phil Waller, The Deep Sea Nomad, Real Progress in Action.
That was pretty good. I think you got we fan wrong. It's WWE fan. Josh from Canada. He's a fellow Canadian. So we just make sure we correct that. You did pretty good here. I'll bring on Mike and Steve back on. Here we go. We're all back. I really can you guys see the chat?
Yeah.
Yeah, is it coming on the cell phone overlay on your screen or off to the side?
I have both.
Both of them. There's 2.
Okay. This new interface, it's really screwed it up for me. If I turn something off, it clears the chat for me. I can still see it in the interface, not on the screen, but in the yeah, frustrating. Okay, good. That's good. And I'm looking at the big screen. It's still on there. And yeah, what do we got here? Any questions for Blair? Blair, what were you going to say?
CF asked about the Santa Fe Institute. I haven't contacted them personally. Big fan of the research that comes out of there. The limiting factor for me always is that I've been unwilling to move my family for temporary positions, and that's the way you kind of work your way up the academic hierarchies. You get a PhD, and then you move all over the world for post. 1 year, 2 year, and you do 3 or 4 of those, and then you kind of get into tenure track after that. And out of the gate, I was unwilling to do that because I didn't want to uproot my family. So for me, it's if it's remote, yeah, I'm on board. But if it's not remote, I'm not going to move unless it's a tenure track position, and those are extremely competitive.
Did I miss something in the conversation earlier? What is the Santa Fe Institute? What's that all about?
So,
right.
maybe Steve can talk about it. It's very famous amongst
Well, yeah.
systems scientists.
I'm not sure how it's funded. It's been around for about 30 years or more, but it funded what's his name? George. I can't think of his first name. The bloke who did the first work on pretty much on power laws, actually. And then you had Epstein, who was doing the work on multi-agent modeling. So the very first cases of multi-agent modeling were done at Santa Fe, and it was extremely well funded. I was going to go there and do a master's course at one stage, but that sort of fell through. But it seems to have gone fairly quiet since then. And I think the mistake they made was that they thought they could communicate with economists. Well, they had one meeting there, which was covered by a book, Michael Waldrop, I think, with a book about complexity and new science, and spoke about the sort of total disconnect between the economists who were there and the mathematicians and computer scientists who were there. And I think they've tried to seek, I'm not sure whether they'll be right on this or not, but I think they've tried not to annoy the mainstream too much. And their contribution doesn't seem particularly substantial anymore. It's just part of the whole academic.
Yeah. So who's there that's notable? Like Sam Bowles, who's I don't know how you would classify him, an anthropologist.
He's a
economist.
Marxist economist.
Okay. I'm trying to think of other people. I mean,
Brian Arthur was there for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Brian Arthur. That's what Brian Arthur.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Santa Fe got a lot of attention in the 80s and early 90s when chaos was a big deal, because they were kind of on the forefront of chaos, and they kind of morphed into agent-based modeling, and like Brian Arthur had the El Faro bar model, which is quite famous, and so then recent, I think some of that stuff has become kind of ubiquitous now. Agent-based modeling is like not a cutting edge thing anymore. It's quite mainstream in some sense, at least among simulation folk. So I guess maybe that's why it's become more of the normal science rather than the cutting edge kind of thing. Yeah. But it's still a place for complexity stuff.
Interesting. Hold on here. I just got a Ghost on the Half Shell. This guy's always critical of my audio. I just changed a few settings. I can only test this live. I don't have these compression issues when I'm recording stuff, but for some reason, my mic setup, my stuff for live bit rates sucks. Ghost on the Half Shell. I just made some changes. Let me know how that sounds. Web Freaks also said he has to go cook. How could you go cook at a time like this when you've got Blair Fix on the show? Come on, man. What is the
question?
Oh, go ahead, ahead, Steve.
Just a question about deep sea mining there, which is something I've just seen by chance. I've seen some company promoting deep sea mining as a better alternative to what we've been doing so far. My worry about that is you're going to be doing yet more damage to the ocean, which is the hidden damage we're doing. We can see the damage we're doing to the sky to some extent, and certainly the land. But the damage, we're already doing massive damage to the ocean as well. And the thought you can then mine nodules on the ocean and do less damage than what we're doing from mining, that may well be true, but we would basically add that to the damage we're doing with mining. We wouldn't make it an alternative, a substitute. And what we need is to make it a substitute. And again, anything which helps us put more obviously greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, but anything that means we use more energy, virtually of any form, is going to mean we make more damage to the biosphere, and we need to be making less damage rather than more.
What do you think about that, Blair?
I agree. I mean, Steve has done a lot of work with Tim Garrett, who's a physicist, climate scientist, who says a lot of things that are unpopular, I think, because he's very critical of almost everything that people think is green, and when you actually kind of dive deep into it, there's just fundamental problems based on the way we've designed our society. For instance, on Twitter a couple days ago, he was saying how, actually riding a bike actually probably emits a lot of carbon, because if you think food is basically generated with fossil fuels through fertilizer, through tractors, through transportation, it's basically we're transforming fossil fuels into food. And then if you burn that on a bike, you're literally almost burning fossil fuels. So just deep problems when you start to think about it.
Yeah.
Steve?
Ty, can you put up TR's last comment? I reckon that's the comment of the day. TR, can you back up TR's comment there?
This one right here?
To the wreck of the time.
This in a submersible.
We need to give neoclassical economists free tickets to the tour of the Titanic and tiny subs. I think that's fiber.
We now have a solution. We hold the next ASSA meeting in the Mariana Trench. And have a terrible ticketing problem means that none of the heterodox people actually make it there. So it's just neoclassicals, and they're into adventurous technology. Let's break the envelope. Let's put them inside one actually, and put them under deep pressure in the Marianas Trench. That's a great idea.
TR, you've set off Steve. That was a trigger. That's a trigger for him. Any word neoclassical,
Yeah, you get into this whole thing about mining asteroids and the seafloor and whatever. There are a whole lot of issues, including legal and political, like who owns it. If you go and land something on an asteroid from country X, does country X own it? Or do the people of the world own it? And how do you decide? And you get into national laws, and the lawyers get involved. And there are so many problems beyond even the physical mining and the pollution generated by using these resources. It's an amazing. It's not a panacea, I guess, is what I'm saying. It's not an obvious, just do this.
Yeah, I think we need to. Pardon me.
We are currently investigating.
They're discussing abortion here at the moment on the. Sorry, I can't. I think I can finally make a comment now. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm in favour of any of those systems once we've constrained our society and reduced the damage it's doing to the biosphere before it destroys the biosphere. And that's my problem about new discoveries, because people think, we can keep on doing what we've been doing for a bit longer. And that's the trouble. We've got to stop what we're doing, regardless of whether there's resources there, and go in reverse to become well back inside planetary boundaries. And just in some ways, like outer space mining and stuff like that, I believe that will mean we can ultimately, if we just push production right off the planet, then somehow manage to distribute products that are made in outer space back down onto the planet with a far lower population, we might have a sustainable system. But if we add it to our current system, it'll just get worse.
Nice. I'm so distracted by Steve's background sounds. I'm trying to put up.
Sorry about that.
I'm trying to put up Paul Krugman's picture, and he's distracting just looking at his face. And I'm a little bit distracted.
I was in his university for the last 2 weeks. Unfortunately, of course, he wouldn't have been there, but it was tempting to see if I could sort of, trip somebody walking out of the admin building, but no such luck.
Now we need to set up a debate between you two, kind of like Mosler and Murphy. That would be, I'd be willing to facilitate that.
You should have left a little note on his office door. Dear Paul, drop by to see you.
I was tempted. Yeah. But no, I didn't actually. I was too tired.
Hello,
Steve. Yeah, one of these days. But I mean, I'd rather just ignore the lot of them. I mean, this is why I appreciate Blair's work and other people taking a similar analytic, and Mike obviously too, and you, Ty. There's an analytic alternative to neoclassical economics, which is much more informative, much more correctly attuned to the real world, and much more fun. And that's what, again, the question you asked early on, what got us all into this sort of stuff. it's a buzz when you find this proper technology. And mine was MathCAD, which is no longer usable thanks to the idiots who took over managing it. But then Minsky, and then building the system to let other people build systems has become a real joy for me. And there's so much potential. I think when we look at the data, I was telling the students this a few times when I was making a presentation. If I wanted to make a case to bias the argument in favor of my particular bias, I would not dare make up data as obvious as the real data. Okay?
So,
Blair, you're finding the same sort of stuff, I'm sure.
So Ty mentioned that Jay Forrester's birthday was the other day, and so I circle back to what Jay would always tell me. He'd say to me when I was much younger, say, why are you writing articles for economics journals? He goes, I don't do that. And first of all, I'm thinking, well, you're Jay Forrester. You helped invent the computer, so you can kind of do whatever the hell you want. I'm not you. I have to write journal articles to get tenure and promotion and raises and stuff like that. But Jay said what you should be doing is writing for the business community and the general public. He goes, that's what I do. And he said, economists don't care about the economy. They care about publishing articles in economics journals for other economists. He said, you'll be listened to if you write for the business community and the general public. And he said, you can get a whole lot of attention, but you gotta make it understandable, right? So whether we use blogging or simulation tools, simulation games or whatever, we got to talk to the general citizenry and the business community and not neoclassical economists or whatever. That's useless. It's a waste of time. So, I mean, so I think Jay, when he first was saying that, I'm like, but I think as I grew older, I thought, Jay was right again.
Yeah. I was actually listening because it was actually posted somewhere on social media. It was his birthday yesterday, and I was listening to him. And here's my problem with academics. Some of them say really great things, but I just don't like the way they talk. But I really like. I don't know, Mike, what do you think? Jay Forrester, just in his speaking, he's a great thinker. Me and you can agree on that. He was very matter of fact in his speech, very old school, but looking at some of his old lectures and stuff, and well, as a matter of fact, we should focus on the levels and nothing else. It was very matter of fact. I love listening to him speak, much like I like listening to Steve speak too. But yeah, anyways.
What always struck me about system dynamics and Forrester and whatever was if you got to know Jay, he was not a warm and cuddly grandpa-like creature. Like you weren't attracted to him because it's so fun to go sit with grandpa. He's so kind to you. He buys you ice cream. He was not that. The worst thing you could do is try to make small talk with him. He would be like aghast and just turn and walk away. If you would ask him, tell me about how you did the whirlwind computer, he'd go off. But if you said, nice weather we're having, how about those Red Sox? How's the family doing? He would get fidgety and whatever, just walk away. He couldn't stand that. Yet he had everybody he taught and was interacting with was devoted to him and would come back every year for the System Dynamics conference, donate volunteer hours to System Dynamics, all because irrespective of his personality, they loved what he started and loved what he was doing. And so, yeah, some of it was matter of fact stuff. Other stuff was he'd ask you a question. And if you didn't get right to the point, he would say, I asked you. He'd be like, and it wasn't that he was mean. That's just how he was, his personality. He wasn't like yelling at you, but he was like, I asked you a direct question. Just give me the direct answer. What do you do? So anyway, so a little insight into the J-Man.
That's very different to everybody in this conversation. But it does tend to happen. And like one of my favorite mathematicians in economics is John Blatt, for example, and the brilliant book Dynamic Economic Systems, which I think I can claim success for having got it to be republished. And it's if anybody watching this show, if you haven't bought a copy of Dynamic Economics yet, buy it. It's brilliant. And as you were saying, Ty, about Forrester, and you too, Mike. He's very matter of fact, and it's very easy to read. It's extremely easy to read, John Blatt. But he was also quite an intimidating character, and it had no problem at all in saying, he said Austrian, so I'll do my best imitation of an Austrian accent. But these master students, they just do nothing. They're silly, they're stupid. What's wrong with them? So he'd actually intimidate and scare the shit out of PhD students with this really dismissive attitude towards them. But at the same time, he wrote brilliantly, clearly. So if you read his stuff, you could understand and be inspired and get ideas about techniques and even issues to cover. So he's they can be individually not quite assholes. Neoclassicals tend to be the asshole ones, but difficult personalities who aren't warm and cuddly, but have done brilliant work to enable us to think about how we might create one of these days a warm and cuddly society.
What was the name of John Blatt's book again? Dynamic Economics?
Dynamic Economic Systems, a post-Keynesian approach. And obviously I haven't told you the anecdote, Ty, so I love telling this story, so you're going to get it again. And that is told to me. One of my PhD advisors was he's still alive. He's a good friend, but he has never really written a lot of original work in this field. But he was at a seminar at the Economics Department of Sydney at New South Wales University when John Blatt was invited to attend a seminar by Murray Kemp, who was Murray, again, is a lovely human being. Murray and I played tennis. He beat me every time. Damn good tennis player. But Murray was a strict neoclassical did a lot of work on international trade theory. That was his specialization, international trade theory. Terminal 3. We have a call for Terminal 3. Anyway, so that was his stuff was international trade theory. And he regarded John Blatt as his only peer because they'd both been nominated for the Nobel Prize. Blatt for the real one in physics because of his work on quantum mechanics, and then Murray for the fake one because of his work on international trade theory. So along comes Blatt, sits in the back row, listens to Murray's talk, and then Murray, speaking over the audience, says to John Blatt, "What do you think?" And Blatt says, without hesitation, he says, "That is the greatest load of rubbish I have sat through in my academic career. If this is supposed to be advanced economics, there's something seriously wrong with economics. I intend finding out what it is. Good day." And then 3 years later, he published his book, Dynamic Economic Systems. And he went right back to the physiocrats. But rather than just saying, to look at the recent papers, he said, how has economics ended up in this state? And in his opinion, the greatest economist of all time, and this relates to systems thinking again, was Francois Quenet, coming up with the Tableau Economique. He said that was such an out of the blue piece of originality that in his opinion, he was the Quenet, who most people wouldn't even know of. He said was the greatest economist of all time.
Yeah, the Tableau was the precursor to input-output analysis, which is a systems approach.
Yeah.
Blair, I've got a question for you. I've read a lot of your blogs and stuff, and I'll just mute Steve just because the thing. Who are your favorite, economists from economic history? Do you have a list, or what are the names? Tell me.
Sure. Well, you've got to start with Marx, who I have a love-hate relationship. I love Marx. Actually, when I read Capital, I loved the history of the enclosures, the history of the Industrial Revolution told through his eyes. I think he's a brilliant writer when you can sift through the Victorian prose. But I thought right off the bat, I thought his framework, his theory, which is what most people fall in love with Marx for, I thought it was garbage. Like right off the bat, he says, we assume that prices are proportional to labor time, that I'm paraphrasing, but it's just an assumption right at the beginning of Capital. We're assuming the labor theory of value, and everything we derive from that about capitalism follows. And I thought this is really weird. But Marx was a major influence in the sense that it got me thinking critically about capitalism. the whole kind of school of biophysical economics. So Charlie Hall, who does energy return on investment, a Spanish economist named Mario Giampietro and Kozo Mayumi wrote some, in my mind, it's kind of inaccessible, but brilliant stuff about energy analysis through a systems lens, different scales of analysis. So I consider myself a biophysical economist, but I'm also more interested in political economy than I would say most. Many biophysical economists are kind of thinking only in terms of engineering. So looking at physical, are naive about politics, human politics, which, dominates our lives. So I really like political economy. And when it comes to political economy, my biggest influence is definitely Jonathan Nitzan and Shimshon Bickler, who are renegades, heterodox political economists, and they wrote a book called Capital as Power, which is just into the question of what is capital fundamentally, and there's this. If you want to get into the weeds on this, in economic theory, there's this concept that capital is a duality. On the one hand, it's finance, the prices of stocks, bonds, that's capital, financial capital. But also for economists, they think capital is also capital goods, infrastructure. And both Marxists and neoclassical economists try to tie the value of financial capital to physical capital in some way. And Nitzan and Wickler say this is just wrong. Capital is purely finance. It's actually a symbolic representation of power. And from there, they go on to all kinds of really interesting analysis. So I read that book and I was blown away primarily by where this idea of capital as power took the empirical work. Because you can say what you want about that hypothesis, but it takes the analysis in a very different direction than when you're thinking about the labor theory of value, or when you're thinking about, say, economic growth theory, accumulating literally a stock of capital. It takes it in the analysis of capitalism in a very different direction. So those are my big influences, I would say.
Now, you said they treat capital as power. I guess referring to financial capital. Where did they place real fixed capital in? What did they think about that? Obviously, they've separated the two to some degree.
Well, they haven't separated them. They look at what the law does, and so fundamentally, capitalism is about earning money from property rights, right? So if you have a private property, you can generate an income stream from that. And as soon as you have an income stream, you can capitalize it. So if you look at, say, the value of Apple or Walmart or any big company, what's getting capitalized? It's not the stock of stuff that Apple owns. Like, what does Apple even own? Or Microsoft? They own very little physical infrastructure. What's getting capitalized is their ability to earn an income stream. How do you earn an income stream is from property rights. And in the case of Apple, it's almost exclusively intellectual property rights. And all that is a legal construct that allows you to restrict, gives you a set of, basically gives you power over a certain set of rights. What can Apple restrict access to? What's its IP? And the government enforces these rights. So it's about institutional power. Is actually largely irrelevant. And when it is relevant, it's because of the way that property rights are delineated. So that's the angle that they come from. If you want to talk about finance, you're fundamentally talking about property rights, which is not to say, and for me, the biophysical side, it doesn't mean that the physical stuff is unimportant. It's absolutely important, but from a biophysical aspect. So what is ExxonMobil doing? Well, they're controlling the flow of oil, and they make a profit from that. But you can analyze that flow of oil completely independently of the monetary side of it. And when you try to combine them, as economists often do, you get really, really confused because they're different dimensions, and it's very helpful to keep these dimensions separate because they do different things.
Go ahead, Mike.
So there's an old saying that that's not that old, but there's an old saying that Apple is really a hedge fund that has a small side business in phones and computers. But I think the more general kind of thing that we've been talking about today is now we're finally talking about it is power, and that's often really not analyzed in traditional economics. They have market power, monopoly, competition, monopoly, oligopoly, whatever. So there's some of that, but really not in the sense of political economy and whatever. And what I would say from a complex systems point of view, it's not just power, but you get path dependency from power because power leads to more power, right? Positive feedback loops. So you get into the fundamental question is, how do you undo a path dependent system that's locked in to its current state, whether it's an inferior technology or the particular distribution of income and wealth and what have you. And quite frankly, usually the only way to undo that is with something dramatic like a revolution, right? So it's circling back to Marx. But is there another sort of non-violent? I'm not suggesting setting up guillotines in the town square, to deal with it. But, is there a way when you have a locked-in path-dependent system that is locked into an inferior situation, whether it's an inferior technology, an inferior social arrangement, how do you undo that without violent revolution? And I think that's kind of the $64,000 sort of political economy question.
Yeah, I don't have an answer. I think, just in general, I think the rise of the growth of power structures is usually smoother than their deconstruction, and more pleasant too.
I'm gonna have to go, guys. I was just too really got to go and get myself to the lounge, and I'm starting to my backside is starting to get glued to this very uncomfortable seat in the terminal. So I better disappear and head off. I'm glad I got a chance to interact for a while, Blair.
Yeah, nice to see you again, Steve.
Again. And I'm going to send you a copy of Ravel and see if you can, if you have.
Yeah, you know what? You did,
Steve.
Yeah, you did, Steve. I've got it in my inbox. I just have to find the time to play with it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there may be a newer version which has got a different link, but I'll give that at some point. So see you guys later. See you next week, and hopefully
Safe travel, Steve.
In one place with a comfortable seat. Okay, see you all. Bye.
Steve Keen. Dad's left the house. We've got the place to ourselves. Let's kick up some shit. Blair, what was the name of that book? I want to just bookmark that.
Which book?
That's the one about looking at capital as power.
Capital as power. Yeah, and it's freely available. It's Commons. If you go, you Google the Bickler-Nitzen archives, capital as power, it'll come up and you can download it. Read. I actually made an EPUB of it because it was for a long time only available as the publisher's PDF. Even though it was in the Creative Commons, the publisher didn't want to make the EPUB publicly available. So I helped them do that. So the EPUB is up. And love it or hate it, it's a very, very interesting book just because it's so different from anything else you'll read in political economy.
No, it sounds really interesting. It kind of hits at some of the modeling I'm doing right now with production functions and measuring your capital stock and what is capital and what is financial capital. So I'm going to check that out because that's quite interesting. Mike, I was going to ask Steve this question too. Who's on your list of favorite economists throughout time?
Right. Well, I'll tell you, right, you just triggered something in my mind. My all-time favorite economist is Joan Robinson. And she would say you measure capital in its units of measurement are leets, which is steal spelled backwards, because she was, even though she's my favorite economist, she was anti-mathematical modeling, and yet her work cries out for mathematical representation. But she really had an issue with equilibrium. She really had an issue what is capital, and trying to the aggregate stock of capital and what have you, the whole Cambridge capital controversies. I'll tell you a quick sidebar story about Mrs. Robinson. I was a first semester, about week number 2 doctoral student, sitting in a macro class, and in walks Joan Robinson. She's going to give a talk. And after her talk, she said Q&A. And so the professor asked her about equilibrium, and she was like aghast. She says, just what is equilibrium? And she went into this whole thing. Then I raised my hand. What do I know? And I said, if you were to teach a macroeconomics course, what textbook would you use? And with the most disdain she could possibly muster, she said, I don't use textbooks. I use real books. Next question. She was about 80 years old at the time this was happening, by the way. So Joan Robinson, I love Joan Robinson. I love Keynes. I love Marx. I'm not in particular a Marxist, but I think he was a very creative thinker. I like Schumpeter. I think there's a lot in there that's interesting. Even what am I thinking? I'm suddenly drawing a blank. His book is on my shelf. The other evolutionary guy, I'll think of it in a minute. Norwegian guy. And I like Galbraith, a more modern take on things. Randy Ray's stuff is very interesting. Why am I forgetting this famous economist? It's one of these. I'm searching desperately for his book on my shelf here. Keep thinking of Thoreau. It's not Thoreau. I'll think of it in a minute. But at any rate, so these are all really creative thinkers in economics that got you to sort of think about things a little bit differently, often in a dynamic sense, even if they weren't using equations.
Yeah, I guess.
Is that what you're thinking of? That's Thorstein Veblen?
Veblen. Why am I? Yes, Veblen. Exactly right. Thanks, Blair. Yes.
That was in the chat, but I forgot to mention him. He's both a big influence of Nitzen and Bickler and myself. Again, somebody who is just out there from the rest of economics, and really it's funny. He sabotaged his personal career. Again, a guy who was notorious for being dislikable. Both the students and colleagues actually had affairs with his colleagues' wives, and literally died after doing some of the best political economy, died like alone in a shack in California woods. So
yeah, he was quite the character, but a creative, very creative thinker, no doubt.
Yeah. Interesting. You know, I was going to give my list out, but you guys are far more in tune with economics than me. And I don't want to be ashamed. A lot of mine are more contemporary. I will say Marx. And the reason why I like Marx is because of the class struggle. So between wages and profits. And that was represented by Richard Goodwin 100 years later with his growth cycle model. So in relation to that, I like Marx. Have I read Capital? No, it's way too fucking hard. Way too fucking hard to read. Do I recommend anybody reads Capital? No, there's synapses is about him everywhere on the internet.
He's way easier to read than Veblen.
And here's the thing. I don't even know who Veblen is, so I'm feeling a little bit underclassed here. Keynes, I find him less relevant. Chapter 17, I believe, might be the only chapter relevant in the general theory for me. I believe it's chapter 17. And then the more contemporary ones, really, because it's a spin-off from me following Steve, would be Minsky, just showing the financial instability, even though Steve kind of really took it a lot further with having separate business cycles instead of one cycle. Mark Lavoie, Win Godley for their stock flow consistent modeling. Without their textbook from 2008, I don't think I would have got into the MMT stuff. And in fact, I often kind of leave a lot of the MMT famous economists out and just go to Win Godley and his works there. So that's kind of my list. But
Oh,
Schumpeter, Koletsky, yeah,
yeah,
those kind of
Koletsky, yeah.
peoples. Yeah.
So I'll tell you a quick Dick Goodwin story. When I was very young and he was very old, I had dinner with him at the University of Texas. And we were at a conference and I just joined him for dinner. And he told me that as far as he knows, he was the only human being ever to be Joseph Schumpeter's student and Joseph Schumpeter's teacher at the same time. I said, what? And he said, yeah, he said that Schumpeter was a very good economist, but very, very bad at math. And Goodwin was very good at math. In fact, I think during World War II, the Harvard physics department asked him to come over. He was an econ grad student and teach physics because he was good at math. At any rate, so Schumpeter said to him, I'll teach you economics if you teach me math. And he said, we shook hands and I became both his student and his teacher.
Nice. I've heard a story. I don't know if it was from Steve, that Minsky and Goodwin were at the Levy Institute at one point and they did not get along, or maybe it was some other university. There's that story too. Apparently Goodwin was not, you've met him. Did you say you met Goodwin, Mike?
And Minsky. Yeah. I was on a panel with Minsky and I had dinner with Dick Goodwin. Yeah.
Really? Now, just on a personal level, did you get along with Goodwin? Did he feel like he was, down
super nice guy? He was very old at the time. He was probably in his 80s and I was 20s or something, but yeah.
Interesting.
He kind of looked at me like his econ grandson. I think Minsky said to me after our presentation, it was Sturman, me and Minsky on a panel at the American Economic Associations. And I did a oscillatory model. And he said to me, good stuff, kid. Keep it up.
Got a question here.
Thank you.
I've got a question here from WWE fan. I will just say, yes, I myself have been through my way back in the early 2000s, kind of a libertarian stage, thought fractional reserve banking and gold was everything. I saw the light. Here's a question. Can you ask Mike or Blair ever have had a conservative phase? I know Tyus says he's like some of Ron Paul before learning MMT. Guys, did you guys ever go through a conservative phase and then move more liberal?
I don't know that I don't think I had a conservative phase, but I personally had a phase where I didn't actually know what my politics were really as a 20-year-old. At the time, I was not an economist. I was actually a musician studying jazz. So I was not really paying attention to politics. And at the time, I lived in Texas, actually, outside of Dallas, Texas, during the Bush years. And I knew that I didn't like Bush, but I didn't know much else really about my politics. And my entry point actually to figuring out and getting interested in political economy was reading Noam Chomsky, actually, and going, wow, this I've never been exposed to anything like this. And so that really was when I realized, yeah, I think I've been left wing my whole life. I just didn't really know it.
I guess we could have rephrased the question to focus it more on economics. Were you more mainstream at one point and then moved more heterodox?
No, because I never had any formal economic training. So I know a lot of economists get a standard training in economics and then unlearn it later. I had the opposite. When I got into economics, it was from outside. I was reading heterodox stuff. And then when I went to, it was in not even an economics department, it was in environmental studies. So there was literally no pressure. And actually people were encouraging me not to actually read neoclassical economics, but to read all the heterodox stuff. And in this particular school in Canada at York University, it's very Marxist. So for me, my journey was actually rebelling against Marxism. So for a while, I probably would have called myself a Marxist, but then I was rebelling against that, kind of becoming more nuanced in what I believe from all the pantheon of thinkers from history. There's a lot of schools of thought, and what you realize when you get into economics is that there's a lot of dogma on all sides, and people love to just pick one school and become dogmatic about it. And I learned early on that I didn't want to do that with any school. I try to actually, speaking of just what do I really value reading, mostly what I read now is just general interdisciplinary science, Nature magazine, Science magazine, science, because I think that it's more valuable to me to learn what the general population of scientists are doing than the niche of economists, which can be very inward looking.
Very, very good. I'll ask Mike the same question. Now, Mike comes from a generation before us, not to date you, Mike, but so times were different when you were.
It's okay. My cane is over there. So
So WWE fan has rephrased it. Yeah, he should have focused more on the econ side, not the political side. So going back in the day, if you need to go get your cane to help with your memory, when you were first getting into economics, where were you on the spectrum? Were you on the mainstream side of things, buying into it, or right away were you heterodox?
So I was mainstream because I was a good student and that's what I was taught. So they would put it on the board and I'd go back and read the textbook, update my notes, memorize it, and spit it back really accurately on a test, and I'd get an A. So back then it was, you should let the free market do its thing unless there's market failure, spillover costs and spillover benefits, right? So military defense, if I pay for it and you don't, you benefit for it. So you got to help pay for that. And, pollution, it's not in the product cost because, you breathe it. So that's what I was taught. I memorized it, internalized it, and all good. I got A's and, I said, well, I should go on to graduate school. My graduate program was very interesting. In the first year, you learned all the neoclassical stuff, which was the same stuff, which is way more math. And then in the second year, you learn heterodox stuff, and then you could do your dissertation in either camp, and half the faculty was neoclassical and half the faculty was heterodox. And I just thought that was super interesting. I was kind of like, well, I want to learn all this stuff, And what I found out was the heterodox people kind of did inductive logic, bottom up. We've got a problem here. What's going on? Science. And the neoclassicals use deductive logic, top down. Start with a theory like physicists, derive a testable hypothesis, then take measurements, statistically analyze them, and so forth. The difference was the heterodox economists at that time, this is like 40 years ago, didn't do math. They said you can't really use math to do proper economics. They did Harvard case studies, so to speak. Then by chance, I discover system dynamics. And I'm like, this Forrester guy is saying exactly what these heterodox guys are saying, except you can use math. So I said, my mission in life is going to be to meld the two together. I always found it weird. I wasn't particularly like a radical or something. I just thought it was weird that as an undergraduate, you did economics either by learning the theory or econometrics, torturing numbers. But like you never would, if you wanted to do something with a banking system, you never went to a bank and said, what do you do? Or went over to the Federal Reserve Bank and said, can I spend a week here asking questions and observing? Or if you built a pricing sector, you never asked anybody who priced a product, what do you do? I always thought that was a little weird. And when I got to graduate school, like in a labor econ class taught by an institutional economist, first 2 weeks were the traditional neoclassical labor leisure trade-off, all the math and stuff. Then he said, all right, now that crap is done. Let's do real labor economics. And we were sent out to go interview and find out what happened in some aspect of the labor market. So I interviewed a UAW shop steward, and he was telling me all about the strikes with AM General and all the politics behind the scene and how labor negotiations went on in the auto business and whatever. And I had to write a paper on it. I'm like, wow, this is like super interesting. way more interesting, those stupid models we had to learn. So and then I said, I can represent it with math with these simulation tools, which 40 years ago, economists were like, we don't know what the hell you're doing, kid, because it was not normal. Today, everybody plays video games or whatever. Simulation is no big deal. But back in the day, it was kind of, you had the machete chopping your way through the jungle for the first time.
Interesting. Yeah, that's it's just an interesting contrast. The time you came from where Blair was coming from is two different interesting stuff, I guess. Yeah. This is why I'll never do a degree or a master's in economics. Too much fuckery. This division of schools. Physics has different ideas, but this whole segregating yourself into just MMT, or you're just post-Keynesian, or you're just neoclassical. I think
this is the whole social sciences, though. Todd, this is the entire. It's the disciplines are most distinct in economics, but if you look at anthropology, sociology, psychology, it's because we have no idea what we're doing, really. It's the field with the most unknowns, studying the most complex things, and naturally people gravitate to answers, and I would say they're mostly wrong answers, but at least it's comforting to have an answer, and people hold on to that. So I think, naturally get these schools of thought living side by side for centuries. And it's very odd. If you come from the natural sciences, it's very odd, because in the natural sciences, physics, you're dealing with very simple systems, and it's very clear to throw out a bad theory. I mean, there are very, very few examples of a wrong theory being held for centuries despite evidence. I can't even think of one. Usually there's theories when the evidence is muddy and you have some wrong theories, and they live, like phlogiston theory of heat, but they die, right? Whereas in the social sciences, they live on. And that's kind of the messiness of it. When you get into the social sciences, you have to realize, my standpoint, or my stance, is really, let's assume we really know nothing, and then you can take what you want from all these schools and just really try to avoid the comfort of an answer just because it's an answer. And that's hard to do. And I think a lot of people are unwilling to do it.
So Jay, again, circling back to Jay Forrester, who would have been he was born in 1918, I think. So he would have been how many years old now? 100 and whatever, 103 or something like that. 100 and whatever, 105.
Well, I will suggest that the level of my age isn't everything in a complex system with other levels. Sorry.
Yes, that's not a bad, well, that's a Jay. But he always said, look, economics, and for that matter, system dynamics, is not a science. It's a profession, or it should be a profession, like law or medicine. So a physician sees a patient and there's a problem. The patient feels sick. What are your symptoms? You try and figure out what's going on, and you use generic structures, patterns, previous case studies of patients to give you some clues as to what might be going on. He always said, look, when we build a system dynamics model, it's a formal representation of our mental model of a system, which we're going to use anyway. If absent a formal model, you're going to make decisions with a mental model, your mental representation of your family, your company, your city, your club, whatever the case may be. So why don't we make this thing formal? Or if you have a bunch of experts together, let's build a consensus model, right? And then let's let the machine do what your brain can't do, which is mercilessly trace through the dynamics of this complex, nonlinear, interacting bird's nest, what we call a complex system, and then change one little thing. What if we do this? Rerun the model and compare. He says the brain can't do that. Humans aren't good enough to do that. It's like mentally solving a 200th order differential equation. You can't do that, right? But if you think about it, it's quite a humble statement. We're just taking what we perceive and making it formalized and giving our best guesstimate. We're not saying it's a law of the universe or what have you. So I think what I'm getting at is Jay always said, You need courage to do this kind of modeling and present it to the public because you always address controversial subjects, but you got to be humble. It's your formal mental model.
Yeah. Yeah. And he admitted that even, especially with urban dynamics, he's got a lot of stories about how he met some resist. One story, he was talking about the supply of labor and oversaturating some parts of the model. You know, the whole boundary levels of urban dynamics. And he was talking to another person he was in Harlem, and this person was like, no, this is a race thing. And they had their big battle. And apparently the guy came back later on and was more amendable to Jay's view. But yeah, you do take risks because you're formalizing your ideas for people to see, right? And that puts if you just have a mental model, you can I can in 5 minutes tell you my mental model and make you feel like it's something good. But as soon as I formalize that, I am now open to having it picked apart because you can look at it. So yeah,
well,
it does.
It's
it does take
also
some courage.
a little more insidious than that. That's absolutely right. But with dynamic complex feedback systems dominated by negative feedback loops, which they all are, what happens is the simplistic solution that people intuitively gravitate to, even in a system dynamics model, will seem to work in the short run. You get better before worse or worse before better. So usually the correct policy or system redesign, when you first institute it, you get the wrong direction, but then it corrects and you get a much better product at the end. But the wrong policy looks good in the short run, and then it goes back. So it's tough. It really you got to get people to understand what you're doing, and when you're throwing equations at them, the average citizen, their eyes gloss over. So we need games or ways to convey this stuff without doing what Jay did back in his day, which is read my book. It has 500 equations in it.
In Dynamo.
Yeah, making it even crazier, right?
Yeah. Blair, we're at the end here. Tell me everything you want people to know about how to find you, and tell me, one closing philosophical statement about economics, about where you want it to go in the future. Go ahead, take it away.
Where can you find me? I'm on social media, kind of grudgingly sometimes. I'm on Twitter at Blair_Fix. Same thing on Mastodon if you like the Fediverse. But my main venue for my ideas is economicsfromthetopdown.com. And then what? So say that last thing again, Ty. What do you want me to summarize?
I've often, and I've gotten mixed reactions from this, to try to make it like if I were to want to clip out a good part of the show where you're at your best, what do you want to see in economics that'll change it for the better of humanity in the future? I was kind of aiming along those lines, and that's really heavy shit for some people. So do your best.
Well, it's pretty simple, actually. I want economics, or social sciences for that matter, that make contact with the real world, data-driven stuff. And that's the fact that I even have to say that is an indictment of the field, because that's what science is. You have ideas, you put ideas in contact with reality, however you measure it, and you try to revise your ideas. And that's what science is. I think economics should do that. And the fact that it doesn't, for the most part, neoclassical economics gets really stuck in just the ideascape. We just need to get back to the scientific method, which is looking at the real world, seeing if it matches with our model of the real world. And you know what? Usually it doesn't. Like 90% of the time when you have a mental model and you go out and look at data, it's usually wrong. And that's the fun part, actually. It's figuring out when you're wrong and why.
Very nice. That's very clippable. I could put some inspiring music behind that and really make I can't pay any money for it, but I could make a good little promo.
Great.
I just want to Ghost on the Half Shelf here has begged me to get on Mastodon so we could hook up. He doesn't use Twitter, so maybe you could find him there. I think he's, however you connect on Mastodon, he's probably Ghost on the Half Shell. Are you called Ghost on the Half Shell on Mastodon? But anyways, yeah, maybe you could hook up with him. I should go on there. It's just, you know, I don't have a lot of following, right? Steve's helped me out. I just don't want to go to a platform and have 2 or 3 followers. So I just, you know, it's a risk I'm not willing to take just because of my own ego. Go ahead, Blair. What were you going to say?
It's understandable. The social media is in a weird place right now, and I don't know where.
Right. All right, guys. Well, it was great, Blair. I'm going to put up our episode we did 9 or 10 months ago. I think we're going to take a few breaks in August, so we'll get that out. It was a good episode. It's just I didn't get it streamed. So we'll do that. And we'll have you back again, maybe in the winter time, and we'll do the you're a friend of Steve Keen, and you're a friend of mine. And I think Mike seems to like you. He didn't fidget too much Mike, you can tell when he starts fidgeting in his chair, and so he seemed pretty relaxed today. So I think you've got the, you know, approval thumb. But anyways, guys, we will be back next week. We're not off, so we will see you again. We will definitely have Blair again. Blair, thank you. I'll do the cheer thing. Awesome. All right, guys. See you next week.
Bye-bye.